Hello, this is Chris McElligott-Park again. I really had not, these videos are very long and I apologize for that. We're going to look at the world data this time and then we're going to actually get to translating over a mod. I hope that, I wrote 45,000 words of release notes and I wrote a bunch of teaching moments in here, and trying to condense that down to any sort of sensible length for a YouTube video. I mean, that's like trying to explain the entire textbook in a couple of classes, a couple of sessions. You know what I mean? Like that's too much density of information. All right, what we're going to talk about this time is we have two base infos on the world right now. So we have this local player world base info stuff. What the heck is that? So this is how it works. So we have this thing called LocalPlayerWorldBaseInfo. It is in singleton by default. Every piece of world base info is a singleton, always, forever. You can't have more than one. It's not possible. How do we get it to appear? In the XML, in the folder, external world base info, there's also a DeepInfo version. You say what it is you want it to be called, where it is, the class name, inside what DLL, and it'll attach it, sort of. What do I mean by sort of? Well, it's always going to be there, but it's not necessarily always in use. How do we determine if it's in use? You see it on the screen already, don't you? Should I be in use? The ones that I put in say, yes, I'm always in use. For AMU, those are the central functions that Sir Limbo has in his mod. His will probably also say, yes, I should always be in use. These things exist in the context that they're created. So for instance, these are defined in the base game. This XML right here that has this file, this is part of the base XML for AI War 2 as a whole. So that means these are always around. If I defined one for DLC 3, then if you have DLC 3 installed and enabled, then it would show up. Otherwise, it wouldn't even be a question of showing up because it doesn't exist as far as the game is concerned. With AMU or any other mod, that's the same sort of thing. It cannot possibly be enabled if the mod is not installed or also enabled, because if the mod is not installed and enabled, then the actual class is not known. So we're taking the premise, this get should I be in use, is already saying, hey, you've installed and enabled me. If I'm part of a mod, if I'm part of a DLC, you have installed me and have enabled me. So I'm probably supposed to be in use, but are there conditions in which you should ignore me? And that would be something like, maybe we needed like a Dark Zenith like manager for some reason. That's probably not a good idea. There's better ways to do that in the Dark Zenith class, but you could do that. That'd be a valid use. And you could say, in that case, return Dark Zenith base info, faction base info, excuse me, dot instance, because it's a singleton, right, is not equal to null. And so this would say, if Dark Zenith is active. So essentially now, this world object, the instance will still be there. You'll be able to call LocalPlayerWorldBaseInfo .instance .whatever, but a couple of things won't happen. One, this says false. It won't serialize or deserialize anything if it has anything to do. And two, it won't run any logic. So if this has logic in here, as it does, it won't happen unless the Dark Zenith is active. Now, obviously, that's not what we want here. Here we want it to run always. What is this? Well, this is stuff that used to live in the human faction, because Badger had nowhere better to put it. Like, there was not a good spot to put it. Actually, no, excuse me. Badger or Keith or I don't know. One of the three of us put it there. I honestly don't remember which one of us did it now. This has some pathfinding stuff, and this gives you a bit of information about how long it'll take to get to various objectives. I think Badger added this to make it so that on the Intel tab, you would have some information about just how hard it is to get to a particular Intel objective. So I'm pretty sure that's a Badger thing. These bits here, this is a me thing. Do per second non-sim notification updates on background thread, non-blocking for client or host. Wow, that's a long name. It's also really descriptive. So on a background thread, it doesn't block the simulation. Client and the host both do it. And this is happening every second. And the purpose of it is generating notification updates or journal entries. But the notification updates are those little things over the top of the screen. So are there XOs around? We need to generate a warning window if it's time for that. Is there an exogalactic wormhole around? If so, tell us about that, please. If there's instigators, oh, wow, tell us. If there's astrotrains, tell us, blah, 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 blah. Some of this stuff is faction specific, and I would argue that it's poor form that we have this stuff being filled in here. It really doesn't belong in here because this is one central class, but because we program the game, we can put it in here. The reason it's poor form is because you as a modder cannot put it in here. You can't follow our pattern. So there is a do per second non-sim notification updates on background, blah, 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 on BaseInfo for factions too. So various other factions do this the proper way, which is that on the very first faction of Darkspire, not every faction of Darkspire, just the first one. Hey, that's a singleton. Well, that's redundant. That's okay. It says, hey, we got any vengeance strikes going on? Are there any loci that we need to tell the player about? And this is how you would do it as a modder. Or if you don't want to do that and you want to imitate what we are doing, then you can make your own my personal local world base info thing that spawns notifications. I really think you shouldn't. I really think it should go in your faction class. That's where it belongs. But what if it's not a faction thing? AMU specifically has some things that say, hey, you're running low on metal. Maybe you ought to do something about it, or, stuff like that. That's would be like a central AMU BaseInfo world attached class, and it would generate those notifiers saying, hey, you're metal, buddy. Like, this is not good. There is also some per sim step logic. So that means every 100 milliseconds, this happens on the client and the host. So on AMU, there is some automatic juggling that can happen for energy output purposes and so on. So, hey, buddy, watch out. You're having some metal problems, or you're short on energy, or whatever. That happens in here. I'm managing your metal for you locally as part of the simulation. That's here. Now, here's the rub. Who are we talking about here? Is this a multiplayer game? Are we talking about the player who's the host? Do we mean the player who is currently sitting at a computer, so the client runs their stuff and the host runs their stuff? Well, that's a desync. Who are we talking about? So this stuff here, this is for filling the UI. That's talking about the local player, meaning whoever's sitting at this particular computer. So that would be a desync, but it's not doing anything sim related, so no problems. We're just filling the UI for the local player. If they click something, that'll go through a game command and it'll happen in sync, and all that stuff will be proper. For the auto juggling stuff that Sir Limbo is doing, he has two choices. One, he can run this globally on He would have to do it the best way, probably. Well, okay, there's two ways. So let's do it this way. You could say, find the local player. So you're like player account dot. I'm not going to type that out right now. IntelliSense is being so slow. Player account dot local. Find the faction they're attached to. Okay, is their faction having trouble? If so, then I'm going to issue a game command, and that'll happen in the next game command cycle, which is 400 milliseconds from now. It's a little bit of a wait. That may not be acceptable. Like, that delay may cause math problems. That's one way to do it. And so the local player, this would then run for everyone, but only look at the local player and then issue game commands based on what it finds from the local player. That'd be very acceptable to do. That's essentially equivalent to the local player making some choices in the UI and clicking some buttons. The other alternative is that it looks at all players and then makes some changes based on based on the information it sees for each player. Now that can be run on every machine so that each one's probably going to be pretty much in sync, or it's the sort of thing you can run only on the host. Now, this is where I have to say, it's important to kind of understand, there's so much context, right? You have to kind of understand the environment you're working in. So with multiplayer, world data and faction data on a client is going to be completely overwritten by whatever's on the host within the next 5 seconds. It's done in a time-sliced fashion, so you don't know exactly how long it's going to be. And the smaller the world is and the fewer things are going on, the faster it'll happen. But it's going to be in at least the next 5 seconds. So if the host makes some energy juggling decisions on behalf of a client, then the client will know about that within 5 seconds at the absolute outside. When you make changes to ships, those don't get sent over until the client hovers over them, getting a tooltip for them, or until a desync is detected and it self-repairs. So ship stuff, it's a much better idea to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page so that there's not as much drift. But we're already sending all the data for the client, or for the factions in the world itself. So you're not going to be increasing or decreasing the load by sending it. And actually, if you were to generate game commands, which then wait a few seconds and then make changes to it, that's actually going to cause more bandwidth, because the sync bandwidth from the host to the client of the faction info, both external and part of core, is inevitable. That's coming, and it's the same size whether you make changes to it or not. What that does mean is if you make some changes that are desync on the client, like if you try and auto juggle energy on the client and the host doesn't do it for the client, then it all gets undone within 5 seconds, and it's like the client never did it. So you don't have that problem. So you're going to want the host to be doing whatever's going on, or you're going to want it to be game command driven. I made the network capable personal settings a little bit ago, before this whole process, right before this whole process, specifically to support some of the stuff like what Sir Limbo has been doing with the auto juggling. And so you could have the host look at the settings from each player account and say, am I supposed to auto juggle based on their personal settings on their machine? Yes, I am. Okay, let's do it. And then it does it. And then the client knows within a few seconds. You also can have every client and every host, well, there's only one host, but every client and the host make those same calculations, and it will know, quote unquote, faster. And if the clients have a disagreement, like they make a mistake, the data from the host will override it soon anyway. But they're more likely to be close to correct if they at least try to do the calculation versus if they don't even try, if that makes sense. So there are several decision points in there when you come to, how is data going to get to the clients? How is data reconciled? Well, host always wins. Host overwrites. Host is considered the computer of record. But sometimes having clients proactively calculate things early can make it so you don't have a temporary desync for 5 seconds or something. Okay, let's see here. A lot of hacking stuff runs on the clients and the host. And again, if there's a screw up, the host just overwrites it anyway. All the Intel stuff is now generated on the client and the host again. I said the opposite of that a couple of weeks ago, but as part of this whole refactor, it's now moved to where everybody's able to calculate that for themselves, which is wonderful because it's that much less bandwidth we have to spend. All of the short-term planning and all that sort of stuff, all that stuff still exists in BaseInfo, and all the UI stuff does as well, because that's run everywhere. When you get into the deep processing, we get anything that's map gen related, anything related to adding new planets, placing new guard posts, any sort of death effects like metabolization, nanocos, necromancy, zombification, all that stuff. The host checks for that and then updates some information. Can be nice, I guess, to flag ships that are benefiting from that as needing a sync to the client. If you don't, that'll happen eventually anyway, but because they'll desync slightly. But either way, then we have all the DeepInfo, which does all of the heavy, the long-range planning that was always host only, and a lot of other kind of deep thoughts. We have a stage 3 of sim logic for both the client and the host. Right now, I'm running most of that on the host only for most factions, but a lot of that could move to the client. And what you'll notice is the exact same problem that I just described here with the central world info. If we run it on the client and the host, then it's probably going to be closer to correct when the host inevitably overwrites the client within 5 seconds. That's a useful thing to avoid temporary desyncs, but it's not absolutely required. And we're not generating game commands or anything like that from stage 3. We really wouldn't want to do that. That introduces time lag and all sorts of problems. So we're not doing that. Game commands come from long-range planning or the UI. We have the long-term continuous planning that runs on the host only as well. And then there's an external visualization code thing, which is what actually draws the battlefield and draws the galaxy map and stuff like that. And those things, this project references BaseInfo, but not DeepInfo. And that's the structure. That's what we've got. We've got a bunch of helpers as well, some of which are in Base, if there's something that's acceptable to run on a client as well as a host. And we want to run both places. And we've got some stuff that is only on the client. Only on the host, sorry. So that is the overall structure that we're going for, and this is kind of the logic behind all of it. The next video will be on actually splitting one apart.